Yes, that's where essentially have a cleaner one of the these days. I'm just telling you about being the previous person.
Now you're all aboard. I'm Judy Love from the Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to our party. We are here today because we asked Nick to be part of our opening session for Leadership Kittitas County, which is a program that's starting its 25th year that the Chamber started. And we take a group of anywhere from 16, I think we've got 22 this year, folks from the community around the county for 7 sessions during the year. This was our first day. We started at the History Museum, and we went out to Olmsted Park, and then we've been up to the out to the Roslyn Cemetery, and we've been to the Thorny Mill, and it's been quite an adventure today, and we will have similar adventures for the next 7 months. But we always like to start History Day with geology, because we've been talking about the built world and our built environment that we are familiar with in the county, but we haven't, there's a lot of things that went on before there were ever humans here, and that's what we're here to hear about, is what are we seeing when we see our environment around us. And I'm pleased, Nick has always been a part of this program. We like to have him as a speaker, and clearly he has a following. Nick has been, for those of you who don't know, but if you're here, I imagine you do, Nick has been at Central teaching geology since 1992. And over the course of the time, he has really grabbed onto the idea that people love geology, but I think if you're like I was in college, it's like science classes were really intimidating. And he has really developed an approach that is really developed for the layperson, people who may not have studied this, but have always thought, gosh, I wonder why that looks like that. And so I would say he now has an international following based on the fact that through the internet, and Nick is a master at using social media in terms of letting folks know that's why you're here tonight, because there are ways that you learned about it. And I'm going to read this so I don't mess it up. But 5 years ago, Nick received the prestigious James Shea Award, a national award recognizing exceptional delivery of earth science to the general public. And he does that very well, and the fact that you're here today is a testament to that. And we are here to learn about what is it that we're seeing around the county, and how did it get here?
All right. Thanks, everybody. It's great to see the leadership class here, and thanks, Judy and Sadie, for allowing us to have a bunch of us crash the party here. So glad you're all here. I'm going to get right into it here and try to give a little smattering of all the wonderful geology lessons that can be learned here in Central Washington, kind of within eyesight of this valley. So the valley itself is quite interesting, but there's plenty more that we can talk about as well. All right? If you open a Geology 101 textbook and you learn about Central Washington, as I did back in Wisconsin a long time ago, I was taught the two main things that are famous out here, and that is there's these incredible floods of lava that buried much of the inland Pacific Northwest. In some places, that lava is 3 miles thick. And the other major story is this Ice Age story, not because there was ice here, but because there were these crazy amounts of water that were cruising through the desert and carving things like Grand Coulee, etc. So those nationally and internationally are the two reasons that people know Washington State. You can throw in Mount St. Helens and a couple other things if you like, but for the most part, that's it. But there's more to the story than that, and that's what I'd like to sample here with you in this brief talk. And I'm going to move quickly here. We're going to do a lot of visuals, and I'm going to try to talk at a relatively brisk pace. These guys have been in class all day. They don't need somebody droning for an hour and a half on a beautiful Friday afternoon. And I also going to go quickly because I'm hoping we can do a little question and answer, whether it's during the live stream or not, I'm not sure. But if you want to stick around and do a little question and answer, I'd be happy to do that. We can continue over at the tab if you like. Okay? So Ellensburg is ideally located to get to all corners of the state. I was just at Mount St. Helens a couple days ago, and it was only a 4-hour drive. That's not too bad to get down to that extreme corner of the state. And yes, aesthetically, we know that this is a special place, this valley, this Kittitas Valley, but I'd like, first of all, to talk about that mountain range on the northern horizon. It's the Stewart Range. This is a photo from Long's Pass. Many of you have been up there. Beautiful mountain. We don't need to say that, do we? I guess I just did, though. It's made out of granite. The granite is 93 million years old. So that's Stewart in the background. But if you get up on Earl Peak, which is on our side of Stewart's, there's kind of this grungy-looking rock. I bet you know it, too, in the upper Teanaway. It's kind of rusty orange in many places. But if you look carefully, it's actually a real waxy green color. So the rock is actually green, but it has so much iron in it that it weathers or corrodes to that orange and pink red. That's called serpentinite. It's a very distinctive metamorphic rock, and it's all over in the upper Teanaway Valley. And if you follow 97 up and over Blewett and stop on the way down towards the Shasta, you'll find more of that green rock. First major message, that green rock, I just said walk like Elmer Fudd. That's inappropriate. My God, people are watching around the world and I'm saying walk. That green rock was formed in the ocean floor. I repeat, this green rock that's up in the high country in Kittitas County was originally in the ocean. Somehow it got from the ocean setting to central Washington. And that's really a story for another day. But basically we have an ocean plate coming at Washington and diving beneath Washington, and all that ocean stuff got scraped off of the ocean plate and eventually pushed to this area. Now that's a time when Washington was smaller than it is today. This is a careful map of Pangaea. You've heard of the supercontinent that existed worldwide, but Washington didn't exist during that time. There was deep ocean here, west of Spokane, essentially. And so as we break apart Pangaea and we start moving North America to the west, we start accumulating crust coming in off of the ocean. And that green stuff I just showed you is part of that story of acquiring real estate, if you're a real estate leader in the leadership class. So this is a real artsy shot of the old west coast of North America. That dashed line was the edge of North America for hundreds and hundreds of millions of years. And if you're having a hard time placing it, that would be about, like Sprague, or going down to Lewiston, or running down to Boise. That was the old coast. And if we had a lecture just on that, I could show you all the evidence that we know for sure that was the old coast. But my point is, that green stuff we just looked at, and actually Mount Stewart itself, was formed after we started adding material to the edge. So here comes this green rock in different shapes and sizes from the ocean getting added to the edge of North America. And you can get real specific if you like. This is a gorgeous cross-section between the Cascades on the right, that's all that loopy stuff, and the ocean on the left. So that's basically a look just at the guts of the Olympic Peninsula. And you can see how complicated it is, but the main point is it's a bunch of green rock that came off of the ocean floor. Sliver after sliver after sliver. And that also is true east of the Cascades in certain places. So it's the Stewart area between Mount Stewart and Ellensburg that I'd like to do a little bit more work with you. So now, this is an old family photo looking at Stewart. We're at Ingalls Pass now. Here's that orange rock, but is it really orange? No, it's the green rock that our son is walking on that has weathered to the orange. Here's more shots. You've seen this, haven't you? It truly is this kind of neon orange. It almost looks artificial, but it's truly natural. And if you hike up to Lake Ingalls, as God knows everybody did last weekend looking for the larches, that parking lot, I've never seen that parking lot so full. You can see those rocks are a brilliant green if you're looking at the fresh surfaces there. There's a good fresh look at this metamorphic rock that only forms on the ocean floor. Okay, we've got it. So the next point, look at the label there for Mount Stewart. Does this offend you? There is overwhelming geologic evidence now that granite of Mount Stewart, I'm slowing down for dramatic effect. That 93 million year old granite in Mount Stewart actually crystallized in Mexico and then got moved 2,000 miles north to Kittitas County and Grant County. And again, if we had a full lecture or more to devote to that, we could get into this concept of what's called Baja BC, where you take pieces of crust in Mexico and slide them north along San Andreas fault-line structures. Sure sounds like a crazy idea. Is there really evidence for it? There's tons of it. And the idea first came out 50 years ago from a prophet Western, and he was studying the granite of Mount Stewart and finding these paleomagnetic signatures in the granite that proved that granite formed in Mexico. But now we have dozens and dozens of lines of evidence that prove to us that that really is the story. So that gets us to the fact that we've had these old ocean plates that have been either coming at North America, like this cartoon, or moving north and taking slivers of Mexico and sending them north. And that, by the way, means that stuff that used to be here in Washington is now in Alaska. I mean, this is crazy, crazy stuff. And yet, it's fascinating, and as science continues to develop and we continue to have smart people to work on this stuff, we can make it all work. But now I think you're just fascinated by the animation and maybe not listening to my lyrics. So that's upstaging me right now, so let's get rid of it. Okay, so continuing, what else can we find in the upper county? Still, quote-unquote, in the Kittitas Valley area. Well, if you look carefully, we can see now there's a bunch of light-colored bedrock. It's probably the granite we were just talking about, Mexico. And then we can see these brown squirts of lava coming through. That's basalt lava. And if we look very carefully at those boundaries, it was a quick ascent. In other words, there was a crack that opened up in that granite, and then this squirt of Hawaiian-like brown lava made it through that crack. We call that an igneous dike, an injection of liquid magma into previously existing cold rock. And that's the Teanaway basalt. That's 49 million years old. And if it wasn't for this Teanaway basalt squirting up through these cracks, we would not have gold and liberty, and we would not have the blue agates, samples of which are all over this museum. It's the Teanaway basalt volcanic event that is the reason for this blue agate and this gold. The devil is in the details, and again, I'm just giving you a little, this is like a greatest hits, right? A little medley of the best of the best. And there's no depth here. It's almost like against what I like to do, but what the heck, I want to keep this moving. So can you see those basalt squirts here? They're colored red here. And those guys are squirting up through. Each of this is a former crack that got filled with some of that lava and shot to the surface. And here is the old surface 49 million years ago, where it was nice and flat, and we had all these lava. So we had kind of a miniature flood basalt story here in central Washington. And by the way, there are major questions about why that Teanaway basalt did its thing where it did. And how far from Liberty did that capping basalt go? That's a whole other question for another day. There's a lot of another day stuff. I guess that means you've got to come back and hear more of this stuff. So those lava squirts are coming up through incredible layers of sandstone and shale, part of the Swak Formation and the Roslyn Formation. This is taken along Blewett Highway. And here's the old Blewett Highway. Old timers in the room remember driving before 1956. And this yellow squirrely line here is the Blewett Pass Road before 1956. And in 56, they decided, well, we'll put New Blewett in. And then they called it Swak Pass for a while. Nobody called it that, so then they went back to Blewett. But the point is, do you know that there is an old road that's up there? The old Blewett Road? We like to use it in geology because there's no traffic. You can park right in the middle of the road and nobody's coming the whole afternoon. And you can look for plant fossils, and you can also study these squirts of lava. So each of the big, real hard hairpin turns on the old Blewett Road are where the road builders went around one of these vertical squirts of basalt. And some of those squirts of basalt have some gold deposits right next door. Here's a map. We're not going to have a lot of maps to look at, but can you see all these guys? First of all, this is 97 going over Blewett that we know today. This little yellow, you might be able to see, that's the old Blewett Road. And this green is all the sandstone in this area near Blewett. And every one of these red lines is a squirt of lava. So there are dozens and dozens of these injections of basalt, many of them having precious metals associated with them. They've all been mapped. We know exactly where they are. And in fact, those squirts of lava are harder than the sandstone, so they make little ridges. And the next time you drive over Blewett, you might look, if you haven't noticed it before, there's vertical walls of chocolate brown rock. And each one of those is one of these Teanaway basalt igneous dikes. So the blue agates are part of this story as well, because the blue agates are coming from vesicles or holes in the Teanaway basalt. Another mystery. What was special about the Teanaway basalt to create these blue agates? Whereas all these basalts we have south of town, there's no blue agates there. There's no blue agates at Vantage. There's no blue agates at Dry Falls or Grand Coulee or Palouse Falls. It's just this Teanaway basalt that's creating this blue agate. We haven't figured it out yet. People have been studying it for more than 100 years. But if you can take those blue agates, which you can find north of town, the northwestern part of our valley, typically out on the alluvial fan, near Green Canyon, many of you have been out there looking around, you can take a good blue agate and get it worked so that it looks beautiful like much of this. So, Teanaway basalt and the squirts of lava, we salute you. We not only get the blue agates, but we get gold miners. This is a guy named Rob Reppin who still mines gold. So Liberty's not a ghost town. There's still some folks up there on weekends or year-round, like this guy, who has taught me a lot about the gold industry up there. And he bought a bunch of tunnels that were hand dug 100 years ago, and he's still finding gold. He's got a couple of new techniques that the old timers did not have, and he's got both placer gold that he's finding. So that means, in other words, gold that's been worked by water and is basically right off of 97. Rob's placer mine is, you can literally hear the highway traffic, very close to Liberty Cafe, if you can picture where that is. This was an incredible discovery about 5-6 years ago in the potato patch. Rob was part of that as well. Very valuable. Those are real, man. Nuggets of gold. And the nuggets come in all shapes and sizes. There's also some fragile wire crystals. Crystalline wire gold, which is quite rare. And that's also in the Liberty area, but it's up high. It's up next to those feeder dikes. So I mentioned that the feeder dikes and the Teanaway basalt had blue agates in the nooks and crannies of the basalt, and then this crazy wire gold is always found right next door to one of those feeder dikes because there were hot fluids traveling along that margin. Again, Teanaway basalt creating both of these very valuable things. And Rob takes the fragile wire pieces that he finds, which are encased in the mineral calcite. He dunks it into a vat of acid. He melts, or he dissolves the calcite away, and he frees up these and sells these online. Makes a pretty good living, apparently. Better living than I have. Table Mountain is another landmark for us. So we're leaving now. We're leaving Stewart, Mexico. We're leaving the green stuff, ocean floor. We're leaving the sandstone and Blewett with the gold and the blue agates. And now we're coming just to Lions Rock and Table Mountain. These are much thicker basalt lava flows that came from eastern Washington, came from Idaho. Lava flows that came from northeastern Oregon. These are much larger, thicker areas. So here's a map of the entire Pacific Northwest. It's a busy map, but each of these little line segments is a crack that opened up like Superman, and all this lava started coming out of the cracks and flooded. It was so fluid that it flooded much of the inland Pacific Northwest. So these are eruptions that are kind of disappointing to some. If they know that it's lava, they want a mountain they can point to and say that's the volcano that erupted. But these are fissure-style eruptions. They did it differently than what we usually think of. Vantage is a famous place. You can see those stair steps across the river. Each of those is a separate lava flow, and there's 300 of them stacked one on top of another. A giant German chocolate cake. So if you go to a music show at the Gorge Amphitheater, this is near Quincy, most of you have been here, I'm guessing. Yeah, you can look at the stage. I guess everybody's looking at the stage, but a few of us are not looking at the stage. We're looking at the lavas, we're looking at the Ice Age floods that came down to Columbia, etc. We don't have a three-dimensional life. There are sedimentary horizons in between those lava flows, which host interesting features as well. And the lavas themselves sometimes have these real bulbous features. They're called pillows. Have you ever noticed some of the lava looks like it's kind of circular and kind of squirts of toothpaste? That tells us that the lava went into a lake, that there was water present. And the petrified logs that have been found in the Vantage area have always been pulled out of those pillows. So the logs were protected by the lake water, otherwise those logs would have burned up in the lava. The guy who did the original study of these logs, named George Beck, who was a teacher here in Ellensburg 100 years ago, he was laughed at when he wrote his scientific papers and said, in central Washington, the petrified logs are being pulled right out of the lava. Everybody just cracked up. They thought that was the dumbest thing they'd ever read. Of course that doesn't happen. You'd never have petrified logs in a lava flow. Like if you go to northern Arizona or other places, that just doesn't happen. But here it is the story. It's a very unusual circumstance. Now you can take each individual lava and study where the edge of it is, study where those lakes are, and you can create maps like this. This is Ellensburg, 14.5 to 15 million years ago. We have a river coming from the northwest, a delta dumping into a lake. You know where Vanderbilt Gap is? That's today where I-82 crosses Menashtash. But based on this particular window in time, with one sedimentary layer between two lava flows, you can create this whole lost world. This is before the ridge. This is before the valley. This is before ranch and home. This is before a lot of things. Oh, you're still listening. Thank you. Moving on. Different kinds of volcanoes are lined up north-south. Of course, they are the Cascades. When you cross Snoqualmie Pass, you can't see any of those volcanoes, but I think a lot of people who know basic geology assume that every peak in the Cascades is a volcano. Not true. We just have 5 of them today. Can you name them? Right. From north to south. That's Baker. Glacier Peak, which is often overlooked. Glacier Peak. There's Rainier, St. Helens, and Athens. Right? We've got our 5. Very good. You passed. Now, those volcanoes are what we have today, but there is a long history to the Cascades, and so we used to have other Mount Rainier-like cones that used to stand and used to erupt, and they have eroded away. So you recognize this probably. This is Route 10 heading to Cle Elum on the old road. Some of you were just out there. And I've talked to a lot of locals who say, well, yeah, I just saw a bad wreck on Highway 10 this morning. Oh, really? Well, it's out by the sandstone there. Well, there is a bunch of sandstone in the upper Kittitas County, but this stuff right here is not sandstone. If you look very carefully at it, there's a bunch of bright white, fragile pumice. Pumice clots. We find all that stuff. And there's other indicators as well that tell us that when a volcano erupts in the Cascades, it typically does not produce huge lava flows. Have you ever thought of that? When St. Helens erupted, there was a bunch of stuff that flowed down to I-5, down the Toutle, but it wasn't lava, was it? What was it?
Mud.
Right, it was a mud flow, or geologists call it a lahar, a volcanic lahar, a volcanic mud flow. And this is a map that shows Rainier in the past, in prehistoric times. Everything in black was completely overrun with volcanic mud about 7,000 years ago. The Osceola mud flow went all the way into the port of Tacoma, went all the way up to Renton. Underneath many of those cities are built on volcanic mud. But the point is, I'm sorry, we got this here, great. This is a corny old VHS tape, but I don't think anybody's done better than what these guys have done. So they're showing what happened with the Osceola mud flow. That's not lava. That's a portion of Rainier that failed and converted into a mud flow. And here comes this Osceola mud flow down the White River Valley and continues to come down at about 30 miles an hour. And then it hits Enumclaw and creates the Enumclaw Plain. You know, the Enumclaw Plain is this, there it is right here, this low, broad area. That's flat because of another flood story. But this is a flood of mud, not a flood of lava or a flood of water. So, am I on a tangent? I'm not really, because if we study what happened at St. Helens, here's a lahar that came down the Toutle. You see there's some people over there on the right. So this is a lot of mud that wiped out a bunch of trees and bridges, but also these trees on the side were survivors, but got stained with mud. And here's a hippie for scale. Here's the height of the mud coming down the Toutle. That's what we want to visualize, including the hippie, for Thorpe. We have 3 different lahars. It's not sandstone. The details of these 3 lahars are exactly the same as the details of those lahars in the Toutle or the lahars beneath Ording and Puyallup and other places like that. So the obvious question is what? How old are these lahars, and which volcano was it that made these lahars in our valley? And I made a classic parenting mistake. I just have to tell you a very quick story. When our oldest boy was about 4, maybe 3, we took a little field trip with his younger brothers, and we went out to look at this. And I got all excited and told him about this volcanic mud. And then he said, well, when's it going to happen again? I don't want to go, I don't want to go to Safeway now. There's going to be a volcanic mud flow coming through town, wiping out the town. So I couldn't ease this kid. And then I finally said, let's draw a map. Let's look at a map. And ironically, that worked. Because we showed that all of the active volcanoes in Washington are on the other side of the mountains. But the crest of the Cascades are protecting us. All these mud flows follow river valleys, and all the rivers from Rainier even flow to the west. They don't come to the east. But we used to have a volcano that did have a river that came to Thorpe. And the volcano used to stand at Bumping Lake, up towards White Pass, between Yakima and White Pass. There's a beautiful evidence for a volcano that used to stand there, and there was a river that used to flow from Bumping Lake to Thorpe. And you're like, I don't think I believe that. That's impossible. There's Menashtash Ridge and these other ridges. But this was before those ridges grew. This is a 10 million year old series of lahars. So each of these is a story, right? It's science, it's detective work, it's story time. Most of the stories are safely tucked in the past, but occasionally it's scary story time. And this is one of them for the residents of Pierce County, for instance. And we're not even talking about earthquakes, but we could gin up the audience with that too, right? There's plenty to wring our hands about, but we don't want to get too crazy with our worry. We've got to make sure we keep going back to the field evidence and trust who's telling us the stories. There's a barn. I know where that is, you say. That's the fairgrounds, and I guess we're going to go look at Craig's Hill. Why would we do that? Well, there's a really cool layer of ash that fell out of the sky. So this is on Indian Trail, where the Native Americans come down during the rodeo, etc. You can walk up there this afternoon if you like, and find it pretty easily. It's 4 inches of very coarse ash. We still don't know which volcano erupted to make that 4 inches of ash. Our date is about 4.5 million years old, about 4.5 million, but we still don't have a way to figure that out. So there's tons of mysteries. We're not even close to learning basic things, but we're visualizing this. Some volcano somewhere has to be older than the cones we have currently. Each of our cones currently are less than 1 million years old. So for 4.5 million year ash, then it's got to be some cone that's long gone. Somewhere up in the Cascades, presumably. Yeah, Mount St. Helens 40th anniversary coming up next spring. Ellensburg, 1 o'clock in the afternoon on that day. We could spend the next 3 hours having people tell us stories about where they were on that day. Most of the stories are heroic, by the way. Nobody was stuck in the bathroom that morning. They were all like CPR to somebody, and then the ash started falling. To finish up with the rapid fire kind of cursory menu, we have to talk about the Ice Age just a little bit. It's one of my favorite topics. Not only with the ice creeping across the border in ice sheet fashion and getting down into Seattle, 3,000 feet of ice over Seattle, that same ice sheet over the Okanagan, that ice sheet also to Sandpoint, Idaho. But of course there was a lot of drama out in front of the ice, and most of you know the basics of this story, I'm guessing. You've heard of the Missoula floods, a bunch of catastrophic floodwater cruising through the deserts, which 100 years ago was a preposterous idea. There was only one geologist telling that story. There was only one geologist who was on foot in eastern Washington putting all the evidence together, and he was still laughed out of the room until he was in his 60s, with decades of denial by this guy. That's a whole other story. But here's the basics. The source of the water was a huge lake in Montana, Glacial Lake Missoula. We have a breach of an ice dam at Sand Point. We catastrophically released that water in just a few, 24 hours, let's say. 24 to 48 hours, we're going to release this water over Spokane. Oh, there's reaction here, so some of you have not heard this story before. So sorry, let me slow down. This is a big deal. And you're like, wow, did we get hit here in Ellensburg? No, ryegrass saved us. So Vantage got hammered with this water coming down the Columbia. But Ellensburg is here. And that ridge at ryegrass between us and Vantage was tall enough to save us from this devastating erosion of this water. But if you know these, look at the water's getting all the way down to Eugene, Oregon, for goodness sake, before it goes out to the ocean. And the coastline was different back then than it is now because global sea level was lower, we know, during the Ice Age because all that water was evaporated and locked into the ice sheets. So the point is, this is one of the sexiest topics with geology in the Pacific Northwest, and we have groups that just cannot get enough. We just go out all the time and we look at all these wonderful features. It can be huge canyons like the Grand Coulee. It can be dinky little boulder fields. In Ephrata or Mattawa, all these places you'd never dream people would go to on purpose, but by God, they've got the geology. That was harsher than it needed to be. Dry Falls is the most famous place to visit, but it's just one of dozens and dozens of places to study this amazing story. So we can put it all together in this beautiful cross-section and see the lavas from eastern Washington. We can get a sense of, there's our feeder dikes that were not Teanaway, but the feeder dikes that fed the flood basalts. And Ellensburg is right in the middle of everything. And that's why I'm here. I don't know if you grew up here. If you did, then you had the good sense to stay, or maybe you left for a while and you came back. But people like me, we learn about geology, and then we learn all this cool stuff in North America, and we're like, where's all that cool stuff again? What's that? You keep saying Washington State? Really? So then you get on a train and you come out here, as I did long ago. So it's all here. My final concept is there were bodies of ice that were up in the Cascades. There was a mountain glacier that we have a name for. It's called the Yakima Valley Glacier. And it almost got to Ellensburg. It almost got to the Thorpe Fruit and Antique Barn, a place where you can buy a nectarine and a roll-top desk in the same place. So you know that as you head to Seattle past that fruit barn, a couple miles to the west, what happens? You climb, don't you? You get an extra lane on your right, and you zoom up that ridge. What is that ridge? That ridge is the terminal moraine. That is the ridge that's made out of glacial rocks. That tells you exactly where the ice was able to get, and no further to Ellensburg than that ridge. So that ridge is made out of a bunch of rocks that should be up at the pass, but they got carried down here by this alpine glacier. And those ridges are called moraines, glacial moraines, and you can study different moraines of different ages to put that story together. So this is from a 101 textbook, not intending to be Kittitas County, but it's perfect for Kittitas County. So this is one of the biggest advance of the Yakima Valley Glacier that made it from Hyak down to Easton, down to Suncadia, Cle Elum, and almost to the fruit barn, which is right here. And here's the Historical Museum, right off to the market. Right? Just as fresh as can be. Just a few tens of thousands of years ago. Thank you for your attention, everybody. The lights on, if somebody can grab those lights, and I think maybe just in the next, I'm going to say 10 minutes, how about? We'll do a little group Q&A, and then the leadership people might have something else to do for their class, and the rest of us can visit in the back of the room quietly, or I don't know, we'll figure that out. But let's do a little bit of just kind of rapid Q&A. Who wants to get some follow-ups going about any of those things that I asked or mentioned? It can be people in the class or anybody in the room. Yes?
What is the origin of the lava that came from northeast Oregon and Idaho? I've been told that it was part of the subduction of the plate that caused that. Is that so?
So we had the feeder dikes feeding the basalts up by Liberty, and that's the Chianoway basalt, and that's not what this question is about. This question is about the giant lava flows that are coming from eastern Washington and even northeastern Oregon. Those were bigger feeder dikes, and the ultimate heat source for that was the Yellowstone hotspot. So the Yellowstone hotspot, we all know, is in the Rocky Mountains now, but we know that North America has been drifting to the west for 20 million years, and if we get North America back to where it was 20 million years ago, we have a heat source in this area. That's the easiest way to answer that, Janet. Let's keep them coming. Yes?
I heard that the plate of Juan de Fuca had slowed down or almost stopped. I heard that within the last couple months.
It's been amazing, yes. The questions about the Juan de Fuca plate, the ocean plate that's diving beneath us, I don't understand how things get into the science popular media. I should figure that out, because there's been just a flurry of pieces in National Geographic and websites and other things about this death of this ocean plate. Maybe that rings the bell. Of course, it's way more dramatic than it needs to be. We have no evidence that plate is slowing down, but the big news is there's a long history to that plate. That plate used to be a lot bigger, and we have been able to find it underneath the Rockies. So it's still hanging there underneath our continent. It basically tore and broke off, and using this geophysical stuff, which I don't know much about, there's good imagery now. It's like taking an X-ray or something and trying to find an old ocean plate. So whether I may be missing part of the data, and I'm working on a new lecture on that because it seems to be on everybody's mind. So thank you for that question. But I know no evidence that our ocean plate today is doing anything different than it's been doing the last few million years. And that's an earthquake story. That diving plate is a main reason that we have very scary earthquakes in our past, and I'm afraid in our future too. Yes?
So, what would be the biggest geological disaster that would probably be the next on our horizon, and what would be the, would you have a prediction for what the time horizon might be?
Things are taking a turn here with Liz's
Yeah,
question. I appreciate the spirit of your question. I'll answer it this way, Liz. The question was, what's the most likely natural hazard or something like that? Can we forecast this? It's 2019, and we still cannot do any basic forecasting for earthquakes. Like, it could happen 5 minutes from now, and we have no way of figuring that out. The smartest people in the world have not been able to figure this out. So that's a frustration. And yes, in the last generation or so, we've learned that magnitude 9 earthquakes have happened every 500 years offshore. That is bad news. I told you what I heard about Washington when I was a student in the 1980s. Nobody thought earthquakes were possible in the Pacific Northwest. California had the earthquake problems. Let's move to Washington. We don't have to worry about earthquakes. And then there were these crazy discoveries on the shore of Washington that gave us the worst possible news, that this is a cycle of great earthquakes accompanying huge tsunami, and there's an army of new young geologists who are making maps of tsunami risk zones. Some maps just came out yesterday. They call them walk maps. Like, if you're in Port Angeles, here's how many minutes you have to walk out of this area to a safe place on higher ground. You're like, well, why wouldn't you drive? Well, all the roads are going to be liquefied, and that's it. So it's a walking story. So that is a complete about face from where we were even 15 years ago in understanding seismic risk. And then there's the Mount Rainier issues and other things. So there's plenty to worry about, and I have learned with all the stuff that I have online that my most popular programs are the earthquake and volcano things. There's something about humans that they want. I'm not a psychologist, but there's this need to be fearful or something. And I don't think, well, maybe it's just learning the basics, but I'm not sure that's it. So maybe I'll answer it that way. A couple more.
What's an erratic?
What's an erratic? An erratic is a boulder that does not match the local bedrock. You can have a boulder the size of this room made out of granite, but the bedrock is sandstone. or a granite of sandstone, but the bedrock is granite. And there's a story there. It's not just some of the bedrock that crumbled in place. It's a boulder the size of this room that had to get moved. And if it's a granite boulder, it's an erratic, and the nearest granite is 100 miles away, which is true for the Vantage area, I might add. You ever been in a helicopter flying over Vantage? You can see these huge white boulders all over the hillside. And the closest granite that's bedrock is Grand Coulee Dam. How are you going to take a boulder the size of this room and move it 100 miles? The answer is ice or ice age floods, where you have an actual iceberg floating in the water. I'm not making this stuff up, I promise. So, that's what an erratic is, usually tied to glaciers. This is fun. How about 3 or 4 more? Yes?
Back to the earthquakes.
Oh, sure. Very human.
Say that there wasn't much risk of earthquake east of the mountains, and now they don't say that anymore. Can you explain what that?
We're in the process of learning as much as we can about all of the faults in Washington, and we could say the same for Oregon. Most of the attention now, almost like in wartime efforts, most of the efforts are in the front lines. And the front lines are where the risk is the highest, and that's truly at the coast, where we're completely overrunning the Long Beach Peninsula, for instance, with tsunami water, et cetera, et cetera. The Seattle fault, Tacoma fault, the South Whidbey Island fault. We're learning all these faults exist with new technologies like LIDAR to find them. But to answer your question, we have known for a generation or more that faults exist in eastern Washington. There's a fault at the base of Menashtash Ridge. There's a fault at the base of Toppenish Ridge. There's a fault at the base of Saddle Mountains over by Othello. We know those faults are there, and they've made earthquakes in the past. But there's basically been no work done on those faults. And what I mean is, to assess risk, you need to figure out a catalog of past earthquakes on one particular fault. Find a bunch of layers that have been broken by past earthquakes and get ages for each of those past earthquakes, and then come up with an average number of years between quakes, and then decide how worried you want to be. We're to the point in eastern Washington where we say, there's a fault over there. And that's all we're doing. So, eventually we will have work done on these faults, and we will probably learn that there's a higher risk than we thought earlier. But right now, we don't have the data to make any sort of meaningful statement. Yes?
What's causing the Rattlesnake Ridge slow landslide?
Oh, yeah. So some of this stuff does get in the news, doesn't it? So this is Union Gap. Go to the... so what was it, a year and a half ago? Coming up on 2 years ago. Lots of press. Oh, my God, there's going to be this huge landslide at Union Gap, and it's going to slide right over I-82, and let's evacuate everybody. And the problem there is they interviewed every geologist they could find, whether they were from the state or not, whether they knew anything or not. And a couple of us, thankfully I kept my mouth shut, a couple of us said a bunch of stuff just off the top of their head. And so there was a mixed message about the risk there. The main message is that thing has slowed dramatically. It was moving quickly. I don't even remember the rate of creep. But that has almost stopped. It's still slightly creeping, but it has stopped. And again, I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers, but it's all hardwired now. They've got all sorts of surveying equipment and other things to keep an eye on it. But at present, nobody's particularly worried about it.
What was the cause of it?
Oh, I'm sorry, the cause. There's layers of lava stacked one on top of another, as we discussed, and oftentimes there's a layer of sandstone or shale or volcanic ash that's in between those lavas. And you can get some water, if it's particularly wet winter, you can get some lubrication on those, and you can start those slow motion creeps, especially if the layers, which they are, the layers are tilting in with the same as the slope of that ridge. So it's common to have landslides with this basalt, but it's uncommon for us to experience in real time during our lives, because we've only been studying this a couple of generations, to actually see how this all works in real life. The biggest landslide in Washington is in Wenatchee, the Malaga slide. everything from Mission Ridge, if you're a skier, all the way down to Malaga itself, down by the river. That's all landslide. One big landslide that blocked the Columbia River. Obviously, I could go on and on. And these guys are like, oh God, this guy's just getting warmed up. So I want to thank you all for coming. Do you have some stuff to do, the leadership group? Like
Not
paperwork
really,
or-
other than thanks for a great day. This is an
Yeah.
awesome class. If you ever need beverage and food service on a bus, I recommend them highly. We had lunch on the bus today. Just a personal, I have a
Yeah,
personal family
sure.
note too. As a high school junior, my daughter was taking Running Start on campus, and she just randomly on her way home one day stopped in Nick's class. I mean, she knew nothing about him. I don't know what she thought she was going to do as a 16-year-old, and she came home that night and literally said, I know what I want to do. There's this awesome job that you can do, and you can be outside. And she has her PhD in geology. She never took a class from Nick. She worked with him as a TA one summer, but you can see, for those of you who have not ever heard a lecture, how she was so captivated, and she has her PhD in geology now. So that's my personal story. Thanks. Leadership, we're done for the day. We'll see you next month, and we'll